You were Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Jeremy Hunt, and Chief Secretary's become a big figure now. Would you, if you were in office, accept the pay review recommendations of 5.5% for teachers and NHS workers?
Well, I think we've always have accepted those. The question was higher than anticipated, as it was higher last year than we anticipated. The question is, how do you pay for that? And last year, when I was Chief Secretary, we made departments absorb that extra cost through finding efficiencies. But I think what we're seeing here is a new government that is finding it very difficult to come with a situation where spending ministers, lay out every single thing on their wish list. Now, to govern is to make tough decisions and to say no, and to get ministers to actually come to terms with taking those tough decisions around reform, actually delivering better and with real constraints. What they're trying to say is they need more money and they're going to break all their promises. They're going to raise taxes, and obviously the papers are full of speculations over what they will be. Particularly for working people. Working people have pensions, they have investments. So my point is, in my 8 years, most of the last 8 years I've been involved in the Treasury, every fiscal event involves pressures. But you have to work out how you're going to push back on some of them. Yeah. And how you have to prioritise. I mean, there are many in my party that wanted bigger tax cuts, and we didn't put bigger tax cuts through because we couldn't afford them, and there was always a balance there.
Can I just stop you there for a second? You talked about Labour's wish list. Actually, they were completely religious in saying they were going to follow your plans. So actually, it's not a wish list. What they're doing is looking at the promises that you made on hospitals, on roadwork. Even, I understand, they're considering stopping HS2 at the edge of London rather than bringing it into Euston. These are actually your promises that they are that they're thinking about. And the reason I raise that is that you cut in national insurance by 2p when you were in the Treasury team. Does it embarrass you at all that you must have known that this was going to lead to a black hole in the public finances? Does it embarrass you now that that's out there?
No, I'm not embarrassed at all. Government is about taking tough choices across a balanced set of priorities. What we were trying to do was prioritise working people's tax cuts as much as we possibly could, whilst maintaining investment in the NHS, long-term workforce reform plan for the NHS, first time in its history, and continue to invest in education and public services. What we also said in the election campaign is that we had a very rigorous campaign to actually get more efficiencies in our public services, welfare reform, actually getting the number of civil servants reduced because it's a historic high, and actually bring reform to public services. And that is the area that this government appears to be, have very, very little narrative on. What they're just saying is, tell us the maximum amount you want to spend and we'll raise the taxes for you, something they explicitly ruled out 50 times during the election campaign.
I'll just have one more go at this. I mean,
okay.
I'm not really talking about the problems. I'm talking about arithmetic here. You campaigned on a programme that promised yet more tax cuts. Now, you, John Glen, were a management consultant. You've got an MBA. So you must have known that the promise was entirely fanciful, given the state of the book. So why did you go along with it?
Because it's also about what you're going to choose to do in government to reduce those pressures going forward. And if you embark on welfare reform, reductions in the number of civil servants, deliver services better and different in a different way, you can manage a lot.
But this is a triumph of hope over experience. Nobody's ever reduced the number of civil servants to the extent that you promised. I mean, it's never happened.
Clearly, when we had COVID and we had massive pressure on our public services, the numbers rose. But when we went back 7 or 8 years ago, we were 100,000 fewer than we are now. And the first thing that this government did when they came in is said, civil servants can work from home as much as they like, and we want to raise your taxes. The first thing they were briefing into the papers, which was not said during the election campaign. They're breaking their promises. And as I say, the Prime Minister can't even define who working people are. And I know working people here in
Okay.
Salisbury and across the country who have investments and pensions will be very concerned at what's being speculated upon this weekend.
All right. The other thing that is happening this weekend is that the Conservative Party leadership contest is revving up. Priti Patel has now joined the parade. Do you, by the way, have a favoured candidate for the leadership?
No, I'm going to wait and see what number of candidates that we have by, I think it's 4 or 5 o'clock tomorrow. What I think is important this time is that every candidate is put through their paces. I admire all of those in my party who are prepared to stand for leadership at this challenging time, and whoever wins will have my full support. But what's important is that we go through a rigorous process of both looking at what's gone wrong, coming to terms with that, demonstrating some humility, but also having a clear plan of how to win back the trust of the British people. It's going to be a tough ask, and I want every candidate to be put through their paces, and I want the membership of the Conservative Party to be given the opportunity to scrutinise those candidates, my excellent colleagues, all of them, in the party conference in the autumn.
All right. Well, let me ask you the question in a different way. Is there any of these candidates that you would actively warn your colleagues against?
No, I will support any candidate. And, the party needs to unite. And I think what the country has been fed up with over the last few years is people not being prepared to unite behind the leader. And that is not the way to win an election, as we've seen.
Well, let me ask you, in a way, what I would personally consider a more serious question. You may know in one of my other lives, I work in the area of recruitment of senior executives. Now, when we're doing that, the most important thing is, what's the job? And I wonder if you have a view here. Is the Conservative Party trying to elect the next Prime Minister or an effective leader of the opposition? Because the skills involved in those two things are quite different.
Well, it's the challenge that everyone has at this point in the electoral cycle. You've got to do both. You need somebody who can, as I say, have the right analysis of the defeat, put the party on the right footing going forward. But obviously, the individual needs to be somebody who the country can believe is a credible candidate to be Prime Minister in 4 to 5 years' time. So we do need to find someone who has both those elements, and that's really important. We can't concede defeat by just saying that it will be a caretaker leader. That isn't inevitable. We see a government that's been elected with less than 34% of the popular vote. I think people generally acknowledge that it's a quite precarious situation despite the misleading large majority, and a lot can happen in politics very quickly in this country.